Lieutenant Geordi LaForge's visor shows him when people are lying. Klingons do not faint. And Dr. Pulaski and Commander Riker are missing epithelial cells. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule, starring Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
Also starring amazing producer Ryan T. Husk.
Well, hi there, everybody.
Today, we're talking about the Next Generation episode, Up the Long Ladder. My name is Mohamed Noor. I'm a professor of biology at Duke University and an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That is
Amazing.
Dr. Mohamed Noor, everybody. All right.
Yeah.
Also, this was written by Melinda M. Snodgrass, directed by Weinrich Colby, and this was May 20th, 1989. Where were you? All right. Let's get into this episode. There's a ton of science in the back half of this episode. Your thoughts, Dr. Noor?
Yes.
Right. Let's get right into it.
Oh, by the way, can we just say you are an evolutionary biologist as well? You know all about chromosomes and DNA. You have, are you up to 5 or 6 clones right now in your shed? So
no, we're up to 7 now. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, Mohammed, some of the things as I was watching, I was thinking about the science of this episode, and because I'm not familiar with all of the concepts and whether these things are accurate or true. My first question to you is the basis of what they're saying true?
Yes, that's the short answer is yes. Actually, it's quite good on the science front for that aspect to it. So there's a term that they use in there, which is a made-up term. This is not a real scientific term, but honestly, it's better than the real scientific term, which is replicative fading. And the idea from that is, you could think of it almost like a copier machine, like an old Xerox or whatever brand copier. That if you take a copy of something and you take a copy of a copy and a copy of a copy of a copy, eventually it starts looking like bad. You've lost a lot of information there. That is actually true. And this is one of the problems with asexual reproduction. Like if we just produced if I just produced another Muhammad, as Ryan was saying, the ones I have in the shed, if I produced another Muhammad and that Muhammad produced another Muhammad, there are always mutations introduced, right? In every generation, there's new mutations. Nothing is fixing them. Nothing is replacing them. So when you replicate after that, you're replicating not just me, but me with a mutation, and then me with 2 mutations, then me with 3 mutations, things like that. So essentially, it would get worse and worse and worse every generation because nothing is going in there to fix it. You're not getting this infusion from what you would get from sexual reproduction from the other gender, right? So let's say, for example, I have some mutations that say let's say I got a mutation from my dad. I may not have gotten that from my mom. So when I pass on to my kids, I can give my mom's copy, and then that mutation from my dad is gone.
Can I hit a quick pause there?
Sure.
Mutations. We understand that is almost, it feels like it's almost the basic building blocks of evolution, the way I understand
Correct.
it. Mutations.
Well said.
Mutations are the creation of evolution. That's how we evolve, right? As far as we know. So the question is,
most of them are bad.
Okay. And are mutations, genetic mutations, generally dominant or submissive? Like when you said, if you get a mutation from your dad, but your mom can kind of counterbalance that, is that a general thing, or is it case by case?
Let me answer 2 parts to that. For the first part, when you think about mutations, they tend to be bad because when you think about it, over time, we are the product of long-term natural selection or evolution, right? So you can think of us kind of like a car. And you can think of a mutation like taking a hammer and throwing it at the car. What are the odds it's going to make it better? It's not 0, but it's pretty close to 0. So that's one aspect to it, right? Now, your question about dominant or recessive. So that's just basically like, would it manifest? Because, again, we have 2 copies of all our genes and 2 copies of all our chromosomes. So let's say, as I mentioned, I got one from my dad. I did not get one from my mom. I'm making this up. Nothing against my dad. Generally speaking, most bad mutations tend to be loss of function. So let's say, for example, this is something that's supposed to help your arm grow. And like you get a broken part, a broken copy. Generally speaking, those tend to be recessive. So if you have the other copy is good, you're all right. And this is one of the reasons actually that inbreeding is bad. Like if you have kids with your sister, right, or brother, depending on which gender you are, if you have kids with your sibling, what you're doing is you're pulling together these two recessive bad mutations because you let your sibling likely got the same one that you did from your parent, and you're putting them both together. And that's one of the reasons that you tend to have what's referred to as inbreeding depression. As you have inbreeding, you start manifesting these bad mutations which are already present. Whereas if I, like I did, I have kids with somebody completely unrelated to me. She probably has some bad mutations, but they're completely different from mine. So my kids are uber healthy.
Nice. Yeah. And so that basically means, if I remember correctly, my whatever 7th grade biology or something, that it actually strengthens the species to do breeding completely outside of your group, your family. Yes. Okay. Because of that exact reason that you mentioned. And this is kind of what they're talking about in this episode. They don't want to just, even just, obviously they can't keep breeding between the 5 of them over and over again. But even if there were 20 of them,
they'll all be related very soon, right?
Or even if there were 20 or 30 of them, they would all still be in that same family. But if you've got a completely distant and separate group, but even then it was only, what'd they say, 30 couples?
Well, so it was interesting that the comment was made that they wanted a breeding group of 30, but they also said, now it was interesting how the guy interpreted versus what Dr. Pulaski actually said. She said, we need each woman to have 3 kids from at least 3 different men. And he's like, oh, I get 3 wives. Like, she didn't say that. She said each woman have 3 kids from 3 different men. So it's possible there are 3 men total, and they're having all the kids from all the different women. Right? I mean, she didn't say now that obviously would be bad because then you would have inbreeding, right? Basically, the closer you are to an even sex ratio, the better in terms of maintaining a large amount of variation in your population, right? And that's actually one of the. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, as far as the cloning thing, I had heard that in a different set of biology in plants, for example, and people that I know or that I've read about that grow certain kinds of plants.
What kind? What are we talking about, Cirroc? I got some tomato. I got tomato plants out there, and I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, certain kinds of plants. But there are these certain kinds of plants where they do clone from these plants and try to make a next batch of those plants. But I've heard of the problem that you can only clone so much because of this same problem. You would lose potency. You would just not have the same outcome as far as the product.
Yep.
So I've heard this concept used in plants before, as far as how much you can clone from a plant, but not really in the sense of people, but it does work the same way.
Absolutely. Exactly the same problem. It doesn't really matter what the organism is. Essentially, if you have asexual reproduction, if you're just making a clone off a clone off a clone, eventually you're just introducing more and more mutations, so there's nothing to get rid of them. And that's where that replicative fading comes from. What's interesting, what the actual technical term for it is called Muller's ratchet. If you think about a ratchet, remember? Yeah, I know. Well, it's named after a guy, Herman Muller, who actually won the Nobel Prize for discovering that X-rays cause mutations. This is back in like 1940s. But the reason they call it Muller's ratchet is because he was using this analogy of a ratchet. You know how a ratchet only goes one way? Like it only turns the screw one way. So that's basically what he was saying is happening when you have, this accumulation of bad mutations, just worse, like a ratchet. Screwing the population worse and worse over time.
Interesting. I just realized something. This episode is called Up the Long Ladder, and that just makes me think of a DNA strand.
Oh, I didn't even
think
about
just looks
that.
like it just looks like a spiraling ladder, right? I mean, I don't know what
double helix.
Yeah, the double helix or the ladder.
Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't even think about that.
Me neither.
So replicative fading is not a word. That is just something that was completely
it's better.
Made up. It's just actually because it makes more sense to me than Mueller's ratchet, which I've got like.
Oh, totally, exactly. I don't know who made it up. I've never heard it in any biology class, but I mean, it makes perfect sense. That's exactly right. I've used it actually in my classes sometimes. So it's saying like, well, you could think of it like, let's call it, for example, replicative fading.
It works.
Yeah,
happens to be from Star Trek.
Another science question that kind of popped up to me. They made a reference about where they would take cells from in order to get optimal reproductive kind of cellular growth or whatever it is. And they talked about the lining of the stomach, right? And I think that's what Dr. Pulaski talked about. Is there any truth to where you would gather your cells from if you were to take a sample from a person?
So I have to give credit to our mutual friend, Dr. Marie Segal, because we actually did a recording once about this particular episode for something else.
Really?
And she said yes, and she said those stomach epithelial cells basically act kind of like stem cells. So in that sense, they can differentiate into a whole bunch of different things. So I'm credit to her for that. I didn't actually know that, but yeah.
Shout out to Dr. Anne-Marie Segal, aka Trekkie MD, that Mohamed gave that name to her. Trekkie MD is our associate producer and does research and development for us for that very reason. Anyway, you were saying, Dr. Noor?
I love how dramatic it was when they had those syringes coming down from really high. It was so dramatic. What are y'all doing?
The music was great though for that.
Yeah, it was like, the torture scene in the movies when they're like about to get you. It's always like from far away, like here it comes.
Totally.
But yeah, so that was my other question too, is they didn't explain the memory loss that occurred between Frakes and Pulaski, right? So we're assuming that some process occurred in which they were able to erase their memory, right? Is that what we're assuming?
Yeah. It's interesting. It wasn't just they lost all their short-term memories, but it was very specifically from that moment. Right. So that was like, whoa, okay. But Star Trek does that all the time. They're always tampering with memories. There's I don't know a biological basis for that aspect, but
Right. It was super specific. Like, and we remember up until this exact second. I'm like, well, how were they able to get that done?
They've mapped the brain really well in the future.
Yeah. If they're that good, then they should be able to get rid of the anomalies that occur from the replicative fading. I mean,
right? Exactly. Honestly, that's a good point too, in the sense that, I mean, today we could probably identify a lot of these mutations, and you could use some sort of engineering things to probably fix a lot of them too. I don't think we could do it perfectly, but I'm imagining like hundreds of years from now, it does feel like they should be able to kind of fix that. They would have essentially like, here's the full genome sequence from one end of the chromosome to the other end of the chromosome for every chromosome, and let's just edit. Anytime we see any deviation, we'll edit it in your sperm or eggs or whatever or actually, I guess they weren't even using sperm and eggs, I guess, in your copy.
Aren't we getting kind of close to that already? Like, where they're able to identify certain things in the DNA, like they can actually see one thing in the DNA and know what that relates to or correlates to.
So this would actually be easier than that. This would be, because today what we do is we look at something, we don't know what it means, and we try to figure out if this is what's causing a particular disease. With that one, all they need to do is just, we know this is the same as that first guy. That's all they need to do. So if they have a sequence of that first guy, it doesn't matter what this particular A, T, G, or C does or that one does. You just want the letters to be identical. So you could go through and use some genetic editing to do that. That seems like that would be pretty feasible and be easier than what people try to do today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that would be the anomaly that would occur in
the mutations.
The mutation would be somewhere on that strand.
Mm-hmm.
There's a G instead of an A or something to that degree.
Exactly. That's what the mutations would be. It would be something like that. So it could be a letter change. It could also be like a gene got flipped, or a section of DNA got flipped, or it could be a section got just deleted completely. Those are the kinds of mutations we tend to see. Often it's just like you said. It's often just like used to be an A and now it's a G. That's a very common one.
Mm-hmm. So it should be relatively easy to fix 150 or so years, 120.
We already know how to fix those now.
Okay.
We already can do that now.
Okay. But it
just would be tough to do in one single-celled embryo and get it exactly right. That's the only hard part. But we have the technology to do it.
Wow. And also, Mohamed, relative to the time that this episode is being written, in 1989, or thereabouts, what was where were we at technology wise far as this particular subject matter was concerned?
That's a wonderful question. It's a very thoughtful thing to be thinking about with regard to it. we had gotten DNA sequences. It was possible to get some DNA sequences, but when people got a DNA sequence, it would be, so we have in our bodies 3.1 billion letters. Okay. 3.1 billion. And, and two copies, one from mom, one from dad. Right. You could get a stretch and amplify it and study it. And that stretch would be something like, say 900 of those letters out of the 3.1 billion. And and there was some effort involved in that too. It wasn't just you just do it. It was a little bit of, it was like, it would take you a couple of days to get that. So that's a big, and like we're nowhere near it. I think that, I don't remember actually when they decided to embark upon the overall Human Genome Project. That might be before. I'm not sure exactly when that process started. Certainly by the mid 1990s, the Human Genome Project was in full swing. But even there, like we were nowhere near done. Like nowhere near done.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that in a physiology class in like 90. I don't remember what, early 90s or something, right? And they had just really kind of started in earnest to map out the entire human genome. And I remember my professor or my teacher saying like, it's going to be, we're super excited. He's like, it's going to be like 20 years, guys. Relax. Yeah. It's going to be a while.
There was a technological innovation that happened around 96, 97, which it was referred to as shotgun sequencing, which was the idea of basically just shred all the DNA and then use this process to just sequence random pieces and then use computers to put it together and be like, oh, this one has an overhang of AGC and this one has an overhang of AGC, but it's on the other end. You put them together and piece it and then try to figure out what the overall thing was. So that was a big innovation of doing this instead of going from base number 100 to 110 and then 110 to 120. Like, let's just put the whole thing in, shred it, and let the computers put it together. That was gigantic. And the ability to actually sequence a lot more at that time too helped.
Now
it's crazy. Now it's great. You can get like a whole genome sequence for $1,000. Like you could just do it. Like we literally have undergrads who will do this as part of their summer projects, where it was before this like 20-year project by like the entire teams of scientists back then.
It's a very slow process. Now, Dr. Noor, professor at Duke University, of course.
Where I am right now.
I want to jump on to Cirroc's very thoughtful question and add to it, or take it the next step, which is, you are the science consultant for the new Next Generations show in 2024, and they are redoing this episode.
Not B.
They are redoing this episode. Considering how much technology has changed in the last 35 years, if any, in this particular field, what would you or what would they do differently?
Honestly, this one was pretty good. I don't have too much to nitpick with this one at all. I mean, and as you all know, you've had me on the show many times before. There's plenty of episodes I'll nitpick a lot. This one, I mean, the overall basis, this idea of the replicative fading, I mean, and the fact they even came up with a term that's better than the real scientific term, it was pretty good. I mean, the few things maybe I might try to come up with some explanation why they don't have the ability to actually just edit the mutations themselves and have a genome sequence to know what the reference would be, I guess. But I mean, it's not crazy. It's just a little funny.
Dr. Noor, is there a way to get the same results instead of doing it the way they did through the cell linings and taking the cells out? Is there a way, for example, because I thought when they initially asked, they were asking for something different, like I thought it was like a sperm donation that they were asking. And because the look on Picard's face was like, like, are you serious? But so that could have worked though, right?
Yeah, totally. Actually, let me ask you guys a question. I was surprised when they said like, oh, nobody's going to agree to do that. Like, you got like 1,000 people on your ship. Nobody's going to agree to this? And you only need like 30 of them to say yes. I was a little surprised
when Picard spoke on behalf of the ship, he said, nobody will want to do that. Like, I'm sure if Riker were there, he'd be like, hey, you just don't listen to him. He doesn't know what. Why don't you go sit in the chair, Picard? I got this.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I don't know what you guys thought about that. Would you accept that idea if somebody said, hey, we might make a clone of you? I mean, it's not you. It's just somebody who's genetically the same. It's kind of like an identical twin of you. It's not you.
Well, that's why I was asking about like what effort does it take? And now maybe I wouldn't want to undergo surgery to get it done, but I would probably say, hey, can I donate a hair follicle or maybe like a sperm sample? Like there would be ways in which you could offer the same kind of help to those people. And I don't know if it would necessarily it would bother me to have a clone of me where I live and reside, but not in some faraway.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
If I don't have to see him, it's fine.
Yeah, if you're helping to preserve and save an entire population, it does feel, I don't want to say unethical, but it's certainly uncaring to not, like, if all it takes is for you to like put aside a little awkwardness and be like, all right, so there's going to be a few, Ryans or Cirrocs or Mohammeds out there doing their thing, making that little planet a better place and saving that population. I don't see what the harm is.
Yeah. Oh, actually, there is one thing I would change. It was interesting to me that they were somehow making these into full-grown adults. That was weird to me. I didn't understand why it wasn't just like an embryo that then would grow up. And like I didn't understand how they were all just immediately adults. Yeah, that was weird. I didn't get why. I didn't understand why that was true, and I didn't understand how that would be true. That was just weird to me.
There would be no process to expedite the natural growth, right? I mean, you couldn't just start at an adult. Right?
It needs all those nutrients and proteins to like fill it.
Well, it's almost like they had a shell and they felt like they thought they could just put this in it. Like, what is happening here?
It's a golem.
That I forgot about that piece. That was weird.
It was a golem. That's why. Which leads me to my next question for both of you, which is, we only have a couple minutes left with you, Dr. Noor, here, but my question is, I was a little thrown back by the fact that they're like, oh, there's a clone of me. Let me kill it. And
yes,
I don't know if that's necessarily a scientific question because we don't have clones of people. It feels more like an ethical question. But I mean, if that's like basically an adult human in the making.
Yeah.
Is that ethical?
I didn't think so. I thought it was not. I mean, yes, they're vegetative, but I mean, but if you see someone vegetative stage, okay, just come take a phaser to them. Like, what?
And Pulaski, he looks at Pulaski and she's like, yeah, do it.
Yeah.
She was bloodthirsty.
Yeah. I thought it was more weird that they didn't even consult with the captain in order to get that done. So normally I would think they would say, Captain, we want to talk with you. They took a clone of us. We need to go destroy it. And we'll, some kind of permission or something. They were like, "Oh, let's go," and they just went
they went straight. They did not pass go.
No consulting.
Totally.
What should we do? It was just like, no, we're going to pop up on the spot right now. I thought that was weird, but I had another question for you, Mohamed, because I know you're going to leave us soon. But on the science tip, another question I had. If this vessel, this USS Mariposa, if it had dead bodies on it as part of the wreckage, would they be able to use those bodies as samples to clone from?
That's a great question. So the answer is it kind of depends on exactly what they're doing. If they just needed to know what the DNA sequence is, I mean, we do that now. We have like DNA sequences from Neanderthal. I mean, obviously they weren't alive when this was done, so that's easy. But if they actually have to take these stem cells and grow them up, then it depends on how long it's been dead. Like basically, is every cell dead? Things like that. Because if they just passed away, let's say an hour ago, it'd probably be fine. But if they passed away, say like a couple of years ago. Odds are the stem cells there are all of them are dead. So that probably wouldn't work. So it depends on how they're doing. And it seems like they're doing it more based on the stem cell idea rather than we know what the DNA sequence is. We can just insert this into the nucleus of a cell and make it go. But
which was the Jurassic Park theory, right? They didn't base it on a stem cell, right? They just got the DNA sequencing and somehow built it off like frogs or something. Eggs.
I forget what it was. It was something like frog eggs, and then they just edited a couple of letters there to make it match dinosaurs or something.
Make it go from an amphibian to a reptile somehow.
Or maybe they started with I don't remember what.
I think they started with live cells from the thing that was frozen in the amber or the molasses.
It was the blood of inside of a mosquito's belly, I think.
Inside of a mosquito, exactly.
But I think that was just how they got the DNA sequence. I don't think that's actually I think that's how they just knew what the dinosaur would have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the cell was like, I don't remember, it was some sort of reptile or amphibian.
There's a lot of stuff in this episode.
Yeah, it was fun.
Another Melinda Snodgrass specialty. She definitely gives us a lot to chew on when she writes an episode, and I think this one is just in line with the kind of quality she puts into the research of her principles and her ideas, where she wants to base her thoughts off. I thought this was good. And wasn't there a big kind of scare around this time of like this kind of thing, like cloning and body snatchers and this kind? I thought this was the beginning of that time in which we started to become aware of these kinds of concepts a little bit, or become fearful of them.
I'm thinking about 8 years later, like when they had Dolly the sheep and things like that. That's the time I'm thinking of with that sort of stuff. I don't remember it from 1989, but at the same time I was in college. I mean, I thought it's possible I just missed it.
I do remember that sheep debate. It was a big debate with the sheep.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, Dr. Noor, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule over at Duke University between meetings and classes. We also appreciate your cool Seventh Rule poster behind you, as well as Discovery. I see Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds. Can't tell what the other one is, but I also see a Prodigy. I also see a Terran Empire to your right. Very cool.
Yeah, there we go. This Terran Empire one too.
Well, thank you very much. And everybody,
thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you guys. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, Dr.
And always remember the Seventh Rule.
You can follow Mohamed, everybody, at MAF Noor, right? That's Maf Noor. Thanks very much, Mohamed. Everybody stick around. We will be right back on the Seventh Rule. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello.
We're still smiling because Dr. Noor brings smiles wherever he goes. All right. Let's do the trivioids of the week real quick, shall we? There's a distress beacon originating from the Ficus sector. The European hegemony, they pronounce it hegemony, that's the British way. Hegemony is the American way, is a loose alliance formed in the early part of the 22nd century. Klingons do not faint. Lieutenant Worf has a childhood ailment. Liam Deegan founded the Neo-Transcendentalists for all your braces needs. Lieutenant Worf performs the Klingon tea ceremony for Dr. Pulaski. Danilo O'Dell offers Chief O'Brien some whiskey. Sometimes you just have to bow to the absurd. Geordi's visor shows him when people are lying. Dr. Pulaski and Commander Riker are missing epithelial cells. I forgot that I put an exclamation point at the end of that sentence, so I had to ramp it up in the second half of the sentence.
Oh, that was another question I had for Mohamed. Would you be able to know if you're missing epithelials? Literally, do you have an epithelial cell count?
Yeah, you can kind of feel it. Sometimes you wake up, you're like, am I missing epithelial cells again right now? It's probably in the lining of my stomach. I can tell,
Yeah, I'm short a few cells, man. What the hell's going on this morning?
5 to 10.
How do you notice that? What does the computer count the epithelial cells? Come on, man. That was another stretch for me too. That was funny.
You're right. That would have been a good question for Mohamed, because Mohamed, I think his best trait is that he doesn't say yes or no usually. He says, well, maybe not, blah, blah, blah. But here's how theoretically they might be able to someday, right? He likes to theorize, how could it be possible? And that's always very interesting. And that's great for the in-universe headcanon, for people to explain away things that we look at and go, I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, that epithelial cell count, I don't know about that. That's a questionable thing,
There were a couple things that I found to be questionable, actually. And now that I'm looking back at them, I feel like there were two surprisingly unnecessary scenes. One was Worf having the measles. Fine, it's a B plot. Okay, sure, whatever. But there was no
Is there a B plot? Because it didn't follow up again.
Right. The only resolution I could see was that he brought her tea.
Yeah, I like that they bonded. That was good for me, a little bonding moment. But yes, I can say I didn't understand why they brought that up. I was like, what would the Worf measles have to do with this particular storyline?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it would have been nice, I thought, actually, if they didn't give the love interest girl in this episode, Brenna Odell. By the way, the actress that played her, I thought she did a phenomenal job. She is not only beautiful, but great actress, actor, and held her own. I thought as good as any guest star I've seen so far on this show. So kudos to her for just like, I wanted more of her,
So did Riker, and he got it.
He got it.
But I think I know where you're going with this. Yeah,
I would have liked to see Worf hook up with her, actually, because Riker always gets the girl. It's too obvious for Riker to get the girl. I would have liked to see Worf, because there was a moment where Worf says something to the effect like, "She's very much like a Klingon woman."
But that's a brilliant idea, because then the measles B plot could pay off. It could in some way tie in where he meets whatever, or maybe he gets like lightheaded for a moment again, and she gathers him and catches him. He's like, "I'm sorry, I've got a whatever." And then they kind of bond that way. And then the B plot ties in. Plus, I loved it. I think it was hysterical. I watched it 1,000 times, this one scene. But I did feel like the scene of Riker hooking up with the girl in this particular case was not necessary to the story. It was funny. I'm going to tell my grandkids about how much I enjoyed and laughed with it. But I don't see how it was relevant to the story. I don't see where it paid off. I don't see how it didn't even like change the Brenna Odell character in a way that paid off later. Like sometimes it just like, it lightened her up, and then so she went and made the deal, or they, I didn't see what the payoff was. Did you?
Only Riker saw the payoff in that episode.
Man,
the rest of us couldn't figure it out.
He showed him some ankle cleavage. That was legit.
Yeah. It was. Look, I guess, Riker always gets the girl. It was so funny because when he tells Picard, he's like, "I'll be right back. Actually, I'll catch up with you guys later." It was like, I was expecting Picard to be like, "That's enough, number one." Like, seriously, bro. Like, we have work to do. You can't always just follow your boner. But
yeah, he's running off with her. He's going over to Pulaski to kill people. Like, he's just doing whatever he wants. Meanwhile, you have Picard just speaking for everybody, saying, "No, I don't want to marry your daughter, and nobody here does. No, I don't want to be a clone, and nobody here does." Everybody calm down. Everybody just relax.
Yes.
Talk about it. I felt like I was just like, what? You guys are getting ridiculous right now. I'm very disappointed.
Yeah. I also didn't like the fact that they send Riker down to the planet. They know there's 200 or so people there. They send a one-man away team, and he contacts the station and says, "Hey guys, there's a problem," and he's trying to tell Picard like something, I guess, like these people are hillbillies, or I don't know what he's trying to say, but
yeah.
But he's trying to say something, and Picard, "That's enough, number one. Just put." He wouldn't even listen to, because wouldn't you think that you've dealt with so many different situations as a Starfleet captain. You've run into different cultures, some premature, some more advanced. You kind of have that experience under your belt. So you would know, I would think, that you would have to make certain accommodations based on the people you're about to encounter. So if I was going to encounter a farming, more, agriculture-based society, I would make certain accommodations in that space, maybe in a holodeck program. something that makes them feel more comfortable and at home. I just don't see why you wouldn't want to hear what the information was so that you can make those necessary adjustments, right? It just seems like a logical thing.
Yeah, it seems like they're still pushing the idea of Picard as the stern, rigid captain that's kind of closed-minded, kind of hard-headed, kind of tough, kind of should probably lean on Counselor Troy's advice a little bit more. You know what I mean? And it feels like, I mean, he does certainly change over time, which is a great, character arc. He evolves a bit, but it's definitely clear that in the second season, he's still like rough around the edges. He's still stern. He's still hard-headed. Yeah, I think that's
but there were moments that I liked. I did like the scene where Geordi talks about how he's able to spot lies in humans. He's like, I'm able to spot them like that, and there was just a natural kind of. I love the
funny
delivery.
Is it that Troy's like, okay, then what is my use on this ship anymore? You got Guinan showing up, becoming everybody's counselor. So I'm like, okay, well, at least I'm psychic. I can tell what people are thinking. And now Geordi comes along. He's like, oh yeah, my sunglasses that I'm wearing. Tell me what. She's like, what's left? What do I do? Like that one. She has no more. All of her skills are now redundant. They've all become useless. What does she do that someone else doesn't do? They're going to make her the next transporter chief, like under O'Brien.
Exactly. It's too bad. It does suck a little bit, but no, you're right. I thought the same thing. I was like, finding a use for her is becoming difficult for the writers because they're just giving out all of her skill set to everyone else.
And it was it was such a great creation of a character. The first episode of season 1, I remember when we saw that, I was like, this is such a great character that they have created. And I don't know what they're doing with it. I can only imagine that Marina Sirtis was frustrated because she doesn't seem like the kind of person that wouldn't share that frustration outwardly.
I also want to ask you a question, Ryan. And that is, to my knowledge, this is the first time we heard a reference to a World War III event, which comes up later in other iterations of Star Trek. I remember it all, obviously, most recently in Picard, when they go back to Earth, they talk about some type of World War III scenario or situation.
Yeah,
and I want to know, did Melinda Snodgrass?
I believe in First Contact, the movie, they say it was right after World War III, and I believe they went back to 2063. I think that's the year for First Contact, 2063. So that means, World War III happened in the 40s or 50s, 2040s or 50s. But Melinda.
So is she the first person to kind of introduce that concept? Does that concept predate this episode in which they referred to World War III, the neo-transcendentalists, the European hegemony, all of this movement happening after this kind of extinction level event that happened on Earth that forces whatever humanity to eventually become the Federation at some point? But was this the first mention of it? Because it seems to me to be.
I don't know. If so, it was in the original series. I don't remember it being mentioned before. It feels like it is to me, but I can't say with 100% certainty throughout the the 70 or whatever episodes of the original series, plus the 4 or 5 movies that were before this and the animated series. So that is a question for everybody in the comments below. Let us know, was World War III mentioned in Star Trek before this episode in 1989. I feel like there may have been a passing mention in the original series, but I don't remember it specifically. So please let us know, everybody, for all you Star Trek champs that know everything. We appreciate you guys. So that's a good question, though, because I'm really thinking hard on it. Now, I love the music in this episode. I wanted to ask you, Cirroc Lofton, what did you think of this guy, of Dr. Doolittle? What was his name?
Willy Wonka.
Yeah.
He was Irish Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka. What? No, it was something.
No, his
nose.
Danilo O'Dell.
Oh yeah, that's right, Danilo, like Danilo Gallinari, the Italian basketball player.
Yes.
Right. What did you think of him? I know why they picked the actor to portray this, and that was during the whiskey drinking scene when he's making all those faces and all that. I was like, is this like a Doctor Who actor? I don't know. What did you think?
I felt like he was a little over the top. It was just a little over the top for me, and a little bit too stereotyped and stylized, I think, for me too. Like the whole,
good point,
drinking out of the flask, the whole Irish drinking trope, I thought was just like, it's been done before, and it seemed like a bit of a stereotype that they played on that kind of a trope. I didn't really care for it that much. I did like, however, the moment when he offers the drink to O'Brien, and O'Brien looks up and at the captain like, "Yo, my boss is here, man. Chill out." he's like, "I would, but not when everybody's
here." He's like,
here,
no way. Put it over there. I'll get it later.
Exactly.
Just right over there. Put it in holodeck 3.
Yeah. Leave it on the transporter pad. But that was he was just over the top to me. And then also it made me think, like, how the hell did these people survive? They seemed like complete idiots, not even like basic idiots. Like, come on, like, like you'd have to know how to be able to do stuff. So, I mean, farmers are not. They were making it look like farmers are idiots, and to me, that's kind of the furthest from the truth. They have so much knowledge about growing and the minerals and the land and the cycles of the moon and the sun and all of these things that, like, there's a lot that goes into it, and not to mention the hard work and discipline of getting up in the morning and milking cows and doing all the stuff you have to do. So they're not just like lazy. They're not lazy or unintelligent. They're actually quite intelligent and hardworking people. So that didn't make sense. And also, how could you survive as a people if you don't if you don't have a leader that's, if you have a leader like this guy? It just didn't seem like he would be the leader that would make your society thrive or survive.
No, that's a really good point about farmers, is that they need to be an expert in a multitude of fields, because farming is not just one thing, like, say, for example, computer programming or teaching geometry, or whatever, or data entry. It's like they have to know a ton of different fields within the agricultural world. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, they certainly know a lot about a lot of things that I don't know anything about.
I mean, the first time I heard about cloning and the idea of replicative fading is from farmers, essentially, growers.
Sheep.
Yeah, so it's they're highly qualified, highly intelligent people. I think they could have downplayed some of the stereotypes a little bit. They could have still had them as primitive and basically using fire to cook and whatever they were doing. But it didn't have to be so over the top. I was thinking of Michael Flatley's Lord of the Dance, hey, look at how like over the top. And
yeah, and I'm going to say something. We got to do our home run of the day real quick, but I feel like that a lot of this may have been directing choices. There were a couple times where I thought that there were some actors were given direction that was contrary or close to contrary to what was on the page. Like when I would think about what was written on the page, I don't think it necessarily matched. Like I don't think what the writer had intended was what the director turned it into in some cases. Maybe we'll have time, especially with the interaction between Brenna and Worf when she was saying, when they were talking about security, Worf walked away as if she just shut him down or made fun of him, but the words didn't match that, in my opinion. If I could find it real quick, I'll say exactly what it was. And so I'm not really sure, it's always up to the director's interpretation of what they want to do with it. But go back, everybody, and check out that specific scene with Worf and Brenna. And it didn't feel like, she said when he offers her, he said, maybe you should have a job in security. And she says, if it's anything like babysitting, I'm an authority. And then Worf like sulks away and everybody laughs at him. And I'm like, I don't think that was written as an insult to him. I feel like she was just kind of being playful and friendly. But I don't know. Anyway, what's the home run of the day to you?
The home run. It's going to be Brenna Odell, the woman who played Brenna Odell. I thought she did a great job. She hit all the beats, all the notes. She was what she was supposed to be, which is, how they wrote her. But I also like her performances. I thought her face was very, she just ate up the camera for me. And sometimes the camera really loves certain faces and people give great performances. And I thought camera really loved her face, loved her performance. She was a challenge for Riker. She was a challenge for Worf. She was a challenge for Picard. Nobody really could, they didn't want any beef with her, and rightfully so. So I liked her character.
I'm going to agree with you. It was definitely her, played by Rosalind Landor. Also, shout out to the music. The composition was amazing. A few of those scenes just had great music at it, and especially when they had like the needle coming down. I was like, what am I watching all of a sudden? I'm scared. Great, good stuff by both of them. And we also have great stuff from some friends of ours. And their names are as follows: Homer Frizzell, Dr. Marie Segal, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackmon-Tom, TJ Jackson-Bey out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arucan.
Arucan.
Also Titus Mohler, Darlena Marie, Dr. Mohamed Noor that you saw earlier, Tierney C. Dieckmann on a post, Anil O. Polat, Joe Balsarotti, Mike Gu, Dequeue, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Live from Tokyo, the Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Jane Jorgensen, Henry Unger, Allyson Leach-Heid, Julie Manisfee, Marcia Classic Schreier, Greg K. Wickstrom, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner and Jason Okun. Please make sure you like this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you are listening in, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. And remember, if you want to hear all of our other goodies on our second podcast, you can find it wherever podcasts are found. The Seventh Rule 2. Just type in The Seventh Rule 2. It's all the new Star Trek series. We got them all covered for you. That's it. Stick around. We got the free-for-all up next. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule. It is the free-for-all. It's time to party. We have Melissa Longo here. We've got chickens. We've got Dr. Stephanie Baker, of course. Welcome back. Dr. Susan V. Gruner as well. We've got Allyson Leach-Heid. Oh, Sue's got a prune juice and chill shirt. That's pretty cool. Carrie Schwent is sporting the Chicago Cubs gear. We've got Gregory Kenzo, or K. Wickstrom. We also have Jason Okun here with always a cool background behind him. We've got My Live in Tokyo, who is sporting a cool background with the legendary Suzanne Summers. We've got Christopher Patrick McGee today and the Matt Boardman. All right. First and foremost, we had a couple non-appearance mentions, right? Of course, we had Eve England. So she had a non-appearance mention in the episode and in the review because she's not here.
Yeah.
Also, question for you guys. Admiral Moore was mentioned, but do we ever see or meet Admiral Moore at any point?
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think so.
He worked with us on DS9, Ronald D. Admiral Ronald D. Moore.
Sounds like it's a no, then.
Yeah, only mentioned in dialogue.
I think so, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Were there any other non-appearance mentions? Nope. I also had a Twitter girlfriend back in the day whose last name was Moore. Shout out to her. Did I say Twitter girlfriend? I meant ex-girlfriend. It's a funny joke. All right. So, Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
Oh, that's me.
Rock, it's your job.
Oh God. 6.7. I'm gonna go with a 6.7.
Let's see. Paul Pierce. Anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
5.9.
8.
Go higher.
I'm
Higher.
rolling the dice.
8. Whoa.
7.2.
6.8.
6.8.
6. I say 6.
All right.
Whoa.
The closest without going over. Sue's going like this. It is you, Sue. You did win. You get it. It's a 6.2 today. 6.2. All right. And everybody watching, go back like 15 seconds and watch Sue's reaction when we're like the winner is. She went like. All right, Melissa Longo, enough screwing around. Can you please get us off on the right track, please?
Sure. So, okay. This episode was, I find myself sometimes getting caught in a trap watching these new episodes, these older episodes now in today times with today mindsets, and not thinking about the time it was written and the time it was, produced. And there was a whole different set of rules, cultural rules back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. So, and so I find it sometimes really easy to find nitpicks. So I liked to challenge myself to find what I got that was valuable out of and these episodes. And there are a couple of things. One, I love the scenes, multiple scenes between Worf and Pulaski. Talk about wonderful relationship building, and that ceremony, the Klingon ceremony, that was a nice little, nugget of Klingon culture put in there. So I really enjoyed that. But I also thought that that they approached some topics, and maybe it was not conscious, but they were kind of forward thinking in the way that they kind of skimmed the surface with. One was Brenna, when she was in Riker's quarters, which made me uncomfortable at first because I have complex feelings about Riker, and especially with regards to his relationship with Troy. But one, she was the one who owned her sexuality in that moment. And I thought that was pretty freaking rad. Because, women are allowed to own their sexuality and enjoy the pleasures, carnal pleasures, just as much as men are allowed to. And I like that they explored that. Also, they're kind of exploring the idea of monogamy or lack thereof with the view of being in the 24th century. There's nothing that says that relationships in the 24th century will look anything like they do now, or even 100 years ago. So I like that they explore that too. And then the other thing I'll throw out there is the exploration of consent, which they kind of skim the surface of, but taking somebody's DNA without their consent is not right. But also denying people the choice to donate their DNA is not necessarily right either. And I feel like the crew of the Enterprise denied the entire crew of the Enterprise that choice by saying, just because Riker and Pulaski and Picard don't want to donate their DNA to be clones, that doesn't mean everybody on the ship, nobody on the ship would want to donate their DNA. So, and so I think it asks questions, or it makes me ask questions that are far more deep than it might appear from this episode.
Excellent points. Thank you very much, Melissa Longo. We've got Stephanie Baker in Seattle, aka Mrs. Mike Goo. How are you today, Stephanie? And what did you think of this episode?
Hi, everybody. I am wearing this shirt, which you didn't notice, because I'm kind of only have that's from Garrett. I like this episode. I would have given it like a 7.2, I think. But I like it because I think this is exactly what Starfleet is made for, a mission to find some lost people and then solve a problem. And I like how it mixes science and mayhem in a way. I especially enjoyed the tone set by the music. In the very beginning, there was suspenseful music when Worf is on the bridge, kind of sweating and growling, and you're wondering what kind of episode is this going to be. And then when they're doing the tea ceremony that Melissa mentioned, they have some of the Klingon theme in there. I think it's from Wrath of Khan, those notes. And then when the colonists arrive with all of their animals, which is amazing, the live animals on set, then we get the lighthearted kind of Irish music that kind of sets the tone. And I felt like it kind of carries you through as they're going, dealing with the colonists and what's going to happen. And then when we meet the Mariposans, the suspense music comes back. And you're like, oh my gosh, that was like, I stopped it and it was halfway through the episode that the Mariposans show up, and then there's a whole nother thing going to happen. And now we do have suspense again. And this time there's real jeopardy because they're going to try to steal DNA. And I love the needles coming, when they are holding the needles. It's a Voyager borrowed that from their pilot and caretaker, that same like going straight down into the stomach. And yeah, I think that's the main thing. There was, the last thing I wanted to add in this section was the body acting as well. That I thought that especially the character Odell, the character Graham, the Prime Minister, and Worf, their body acting when they weren't speaking, Odell was running around and like going in between people and diving. And then Graham was very calm and serious. It kind of reflected more like science. And then Worf, when he blocked Odell from approaching Picard at the turbo lift, he used his body. There wasn't dialogue. There was just body language or body acting. And I thought that was really well done in this episode.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Mrs. Mike Goo. Also, we've got Dr. Susan V. Gruner here. What's up, Dr. Sue? What did you think of this one?
Well, I love the first scenes with Worf and Dr. Pulaski. Remember, we started out not liking her. She did not treat Data well, and her character, I think, thus far, has shown the most growth. That stuff with her with the Klingon tea ceremony, everything was pretty amazing. Her keeping the secret from everybody else. I thought, what a great character. I love Gates McFadden as Dr. Crusher, but I really love Dr. Pulaski. What a dilemma. I want them both. There's some things that I wasn't crazy about with this episode, but I'll talk about those and what's left unsaid. But and also I agreed with what Stephanie said. There are some great moments in this episode with people doing things and not saying a word. That's amazing.
That's great
Is
stuff.
that called body acting? Is that literally what it's called?
Yeah, physical.
Physical.
Mm-hmm. Non-verbal communication, the French call it. Thanks very much, Dr. Susan V. Gruner. Allyson Leach-Heid is here. What's up, Allyson? What did you think of this episode?
I like this episode, and for the reasons that were already mentioned, Pulaski and Worf are great buddies. I love their scenes together, and I've loved them like for episodes. They work well together. So yes, watching the tea ceremony, and I love that Pulaski's like, oh no, I'm going to take the antidote right now. I'm going to do the full thing. Like, I'm in this. You're doing this for me. I am doing this for you. And I think it's a great way of showing her her growth in just becoming a member of this family. And I really love that. So that's my favorite part. And I'm sure they all loved having all those animals on set. A ton of fun, because you never want to work with children and animals, and they had a lot. So that's fun. I loved like all of them on the transporter pad with it always got me like, why did they transport the hay? It's like, why did that have to come to?
Yes.
I'm like, why? That's just a lot of set dressing. That's not necessary, but it makes it look fun and ridiculous, which I think they were kind of leaning into a bit of the ridiculousness with what are they called? That they're not the Mariposans, because those are the cloners. The Brinloidy. Thank you. And so they were really leaning in on that. So yes, it's fun to lean in on the ridiculousness. They were a little heavy with stereotypes, which is harder now than it was then. And I do feel like I didn't even know what Melinda's like original idea for this script was. And it was really about her commentary on immigration in the United States. So that's kind of been lost over the rewrites. So that's kind of sad, but it's a fun episode. Yes, it has some issues that have not aged well. But I don't tend to skip it because I love watching Worf and Pulaski. So.
Well, thank you very much, Allyson Leach-Heid. What's up, Greg K? What'd you think of this one? You snuck in right before we hit record that you loved this episode.
I do. And I have to say, I know this relationship does seem real bad. And I agree with what Melissa said earlier. Like, you kind of have to view it in that lens, And it was great up until the very end, where like you're never going to have a really good repopulation of like a small amount of people. Like that's where you have to write it in. So everything was good up until then. Like I'm going to paint with broad strokes here, because I think Ryan and Cirroc and everybody else that came before me covered everything. It was just lighthearted and fun, and I love those kinds of episodes. And by the way, with Riker and Troy's relation, they must have an open relationship, right? Like,
oh yeah.
At this point, like Riker has done that so many times. Like you can that's what I'm assuming. was a charming episode. The Neo Transcendentalists or the Brimloidy. Yeah, this one just represented balance to me, kind of like a balance between technology and what they called neo-transcendentalism, which is what the Brimloidy represent, right? Like the rejection of technology. And they kind of came together at the end and said, hey, you have to have kind of both to have a complete society. And that's what, I'm in IT, so I have to take a break from computers a lot of the time. I get this. And I live in Hawaii, so I have a great place to go and do that. Other than that, I think Danilo O'Dell is his name. His comedy was on point. Like, he had me cracking up. Reminded me of Dick Van Dyke a bit, with a lot of his, in Mary Poppins, I should say. Like, a lot of his expressions were kind of like the same. I'm not going to deny Riker and Brenna Odell's relationship is dicey. Like, that probably, there's a lot of things that wouldn't fly too much, but I thought she was great. I thought she had a lot of power, and she was really the leader. She was the boss of her dad, who is the leader, right, of the Brimloidy. Yeah, I think this episode could have been its own spin-off series, like, if not in itself, but you can do, this was like quintessential sci-fi, like, it had twists and turns at I was like, oh, this is going to be a Pulaski and Worf episode. It's like, oh, nope, there's like a whole different group of people. And then the clones came in, and I was like, where did they come from? But, oh, shoot, sorry. I hope that isn't too loud. But, yeah, to me, it just represented balance. And I think that's what we need in life. And, yeah, there's a lot of other things I can say about it, but I'll save that for...
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Greg, way out in Hawaii. Thanks for hanging out with us. Also, we've got Carrie Schwent here, feeling very festive in her green Chicago Cubs sweater. What do you think of this one? Did you love it?
I do. I'm a sucker for anything Irish. I've got my Blarney Castle behind me and my St. Patty's Day Cubs shirt. Yeah, I'm a sucker for all of it. And according to Ancestry DNA, I'm actually 8% Irish, so I'm genetically predisposed to like the Irish. And the father and daughter, they every single scene they absolutely stole. Were the accents a little bit exaggerated? Sure, but I didn't mind because they both sold it. She has got some serious moxie, and she was very much a match for Riker, I think. And their whole thing in Riker's quarters would chalk that up to she had it she needed to scratch, and we'll leave it at that. As far as the clones go, yeah, I'm with Riker on that one. I personally wouldn't want a clone of me. No, I'm too big of a klutz. No one needs a clone of me, frankly. But yeah, there probably would have been a handful of people on the ship that probably would have been okay with it. And Dr. Pulaski finally, completely won me over with her standing there, lying to Picard, standing there crossing her fingers in the air. Just absolutely super, super sweet. Couple of things I noticed, and they're like a blink and you miss it. When Riker and Pulaski are knocked out in the Prime Minister's office and they get dragged away, their eyes are both open to start with. But if you watch Riker right before he gets out of frame, he looks directly at the camera. For like a split second, he looks directly at the camera. I paused it a couple of times to make sure I wasn't going completely bonkers. Yeah. Okay. Now I have a whole thing about the Worf and Papa Odell sharing their we dram a whiskey, but I'll save that for later. But I decided, as far as the limerick for this episode goes, and apparently the limerick has vague origins in Ireland. Nobody's completely sure, but the prevailing opinion is it probably started there. So I decided that Brenna's doing all her cleaning in the cargo bay, and she's all irritated with all the men for not helping out and doing anything like they usually do. She's composing some poetry because she doesn't know what else to do. She's keeping her mind busy while her hands are busy. So here we go. Isn't that just like a bloody man helping us with chores? You're just not a fan. You'd rather just drink and flirt with a wink. Why we don't kill you, I don't understand. And apologies if I ended up having a little bit of Irish slip into there. I find that happens sometimes. Especially if I'm watching Young Sheldon, I start to talk Southern like them too. It's kind of fun. I catch myself doing it after a while. But yeah, the whiskey talk, we'll save for after.
All right. Great. Thank you very much, Carrie. You reminded me of something that our good friend Eve England pointed out a couple of days ago. Maybe she was saying that she wasn't coming in, but she did catch Riker breaking the fourth wall. I missed it on the watch, but let's see if we can't pull it up here just real quick, because she sent in a little video of it. Here it is. So watch Riker. There's the look. See,
it's really quick.
Yeah, it's a blink and you miss it kind of thing. There he is. He's looking at you. So watch.
Hey.
Now watch it.
Totally.
Oh, man.
Totally did.
Anyway, all right.
Looks like
Back into the left.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Carrie. Jason, the outrageous Okun, is smiling because he's like, this is the first time all year that I've seen something that I missed before. So great stuff there. What do you got for us today, Jason?
It certainly is. Thank you. And, Up the Long Ladder is to me, it's again, one of those quintessential second season episodes. There's certainly wonderful moments, and the Pulaski Worf moment is probably the best of them all. There are quite a few actually science fiction ideas here that are really interesting. I mean, this whole thing about the rejection of technology, or kind of going back to the primitive, is something that was even raised in the original series and in the infamous Way to Eden, and we see it again on Deep Space and Paradise. So this kind of stuff keeps repeating over and over again in a very interesting way. I mean, there are quite a few things to say about that, and I'll certainly save them for later as to what you throw out along with technology. But when it comes to, the clones and the control of your body, it's cloning. There are a lot of different themes, and perhaps they're not explored as you would want them to be explored. But maybe, as Melissa said, it's par for the course in terms of, you're looking at something that was written in the 1980s. So you really have to understand that they probably weren't going to go that way. But there were a lot of themes here. And frankly, the fact that it ended up in Rick Colby's hands, I mean, I wouldn't say this is his best outing, but the episode moves swiftly. It certainly is fun, whatever you think of the stereotypes. And I do know some people found them offensive even at the time. And they certainly don't play well now, so many years later. But certain things that Rick Colby did in terms of the look there, I think there's about a 1.5, almost 1.5 minute oneer in Caesar where Picard sits at his desk, walks around, and kind of comes back. You don't often see shots that long. You do from certain directors, but not often. Sometimes it's just basically just singles or two shots that they go with. So this was interesting, and a lot of scenes, especially on the bridge, it starts with a little bit of a camera movement, sort of sweeping camera movement. It pans along with the characters and moves around. So at least it gives you a little bit of interest. And I think they certainly milked a lot out of the Mariposa scenes because they used the same hallway. If you notice, it's really the same hallway that they walk down. That they just moved the statue to a different location. And moved the statue. One actually had one hand up and the other had the other hand up. So they had two statues. Very interesting ones. And there was also a wonderful use of, I guess, masking tape. There were glass walls and what looked like blue construction tape. It really gives you kind of an interesting look. So yeah, it did have some interest to it. And Matt, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit. I think when the Enterprise, at least in the remastered shot, when the Enterprise was, I guess, orbiting Mariposa, there was a reflection in the rings. I don't know if it was in the original, but it certainly was in the remastered version. So I don't know if that was put in. I somehow doubt it was in the original, but I don't know. I don't remember that at all. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So again, I mean, it was visually more interesting perhaps than others. It had certain sort of nice moments to it. Overall, again, it's to me, it's sort of a quintessential episode of the second season. And again, I'll save a lot of this for later, but I think it may have been one of the most rewritten episodes of the second season.
Really? Cool. We'll have to stick around for that. It felt like it. It felt like there were some things that may have been removed, or certainly removed is what it felt like to me. But that's just what I think. What do you think, My Live in Tokyo with the cool purple sweater? She got the memo. We're purple team. What do you think?
Right? So many storylines. As a viewer, I like the convoluted web that we have to untangle in this episode. The imagery, it's like going to an Irish bar. It's always filled with bric-a-brac from here and there, the way they decorate them. We were visually bombarded with a veritable cornucopia of mixed images. I loved all the different things to look at. Sue's favorite green crop top fisherman's knit sweater, the French press on the conference room in when Picard's talking to the PM with the plunger taken out. What were they doing? Drinking grounds there? It was a lot of imagery going on there. I mean, it was hard to keep up with sometimes, but it matched the various storylines very smoothly, though. So I thought it was a well-blended episode. Interestingly, they used the British pronunciation of hegemony. They used hegemony, which the Brits rationalized by saying the hard G in the original Greek. Okay, fine. But then later they used the word cogent, and they used the soft G, which is also derived from a Latin hard G-based word called cogere. So I don't know. That was just a small point about the language that was used. I was curious why an American would have pronounced hegemony. But the big message that I took away from this episode was the PM says, you would be preserving yourself. And Riker's like, human beings have other ways of doing that. We have children. And this made me cringe a little bit, because I know a lot of childless women who get incredibly tired of feeling the constant need to explain their life choices. Some folks just don't want kids. And that was one thing. And then I recalled that earlier this week, the great innovator in free jazz from the 60s, Carla Bley, passed on. This person to my right, the shoulder. She leaves a body of music spanning decades that preserves her. Suzanne Summers, I think, is most well known not just as an entertainer, but for her business acumen over a long career on and off the screen and stage. Sure, she has kids and grandkids, but that's not the focus of what preserves her legacy. So it really is a curious question to me. How do we preserve ourselves? And I think maybe the writers wanted us to cogitate on that one for a bit.
Very good. Thank you so much, My Live in Tokyo. However, right now we've got Christopher Patrick McGee, aka McGillicuddy. Cool. That's I Love Lucy reference. What's up? What do you think of this one, Dark Lord?
This has always been kind of a favorite of mine. And yeah, this will be the only time I show my full name. Don't worry. And McGillicuddy, that's the nickname my mother uses for me when she's in a good mood. Of course, if I was in trouble, she'd call me Christopher Patrick McGee. I'm sure Ben Sisko more than a few times called for Jacob Isaac Sisko. Yeah, so in this episode, no Wesley Crusher, by the way. He was absent in this one. Takes place in the Ficus sector. I'm guessing that's in the Fern cluster. But I always found, I'll mention this though. I found it interesting. Just a small little thing that I noticed is that during the beam in on Mariposa for the first time, they catch it like in mid transport. If I'm not mistaken, up until now, all the transports that we've seen have been shown either like from beginning to end, a full transport, or it's occurred off screen somewhere. So it's kind of a nice choice by the director to just show part of it, because you don't need to see the whole thing anymore. We've seen it for almost 2 full seasons now. So also, I noticed something rather interesting while watching this episode, and I'm not the only one who noticed this. One of the 5 clones on Mariposa must have been a clone of Eddie Murphy. I swear.
That's what I thought. I thought the same thing, because the clone never looks quite as good as the original. So it's a cloned Eddie Murphy.
They tried to get Eddie Murphy, but he couldn't do it.
Yeah. He was ordered on Wish.
So those were actually triplets.
He answered the casting call for Eddie Murphy type.
Well, they have triplets that are Eddie Murphy type.
Quite surprising. As for my memorable quote of the episode, I could have gone with replicative fading. I thought it was an interesting term, but instead I'll go with one I think is even more interesting, and that is, every moment of pleasure in life has to be purchased by an equal moment of pain.
Poignant. Thanks very much, Chris. Awesome He-Man shirt, by the way. Sorry, I missed that. Look, everybody, it's the Matt Boardman. He's hanging out with us. Thank goodness for that. What do you think of this episode?
Oh, this one's always fun. I mean, yes, there are things that people, I guess, point to the episode of, stereotypes and whatever. But I don't know. There's just so many fun moments in this one. This was a fun one to work on. As I was reading through the Memory Alpha entry for this, I noticed that there was a comment at the end of it that said that if you remember the screen in which Picard is looking through the manifest of what was on the Mariposa, and one of the things that was on there was that in the original it was Alderaan, which was a reference to Star Wars, and it got changed to Aldebaran, which I was the one who changed that because that particular graphic was not it wasn't really recoverable from what they originally filmed, so I had to go in, I had to recreate that whole graphic. The other thing that they were concerned about is that there were a ton of references to U.S. companies, and they were really worried that once you were able to read that it might cause some legal issues. And so, I mean, there was stuff like AT&T was on there. I'm trying to think of, there was some stuff like I think one of the Bell telecommunication companies on there. Obviously they don't exist anymore right now, but yeah, but one of the things was the Alderaan, and I remember Mike being like, well, as fun as that is, I think maybe there might be some issues, so we had to change it to Aldebaran. I love there's so many comedy moments in this that I absolutely love. One of the things, and you can see this on the DVD and Blu-ray extras now, but it's there's a moment that we got to see when they were going through all the footage that they found, where you have Gene Roddenberry, Michael Dorn, and Barry Ingram, and they're singing this like Irish drinking song or something like that. It's the three of them, and I think they might even have it on YouTube right now. But it was just so much fun to see everybody just kind of, and Worf, who was always so stoic, and have Michael Dorn just, they're just kind of jamming there and everything. It was absolutely fun. And then the other one thing that I really enjoyed is when Dano takes the drink, the Klingon drink, because he's complaining about like the synthahol, like this stuff is swill, right? And so he drinks that, and then he gets in trouble, and and the face that he makes, and he does that hello, my darling, as he's trying to recover from that. And I always had, I just remember as a teenager having the biggest crush on Rosalind Landor in her role in this one. I don't know. She presented herself very well because, and has been pointed out by other people, I've been very blessed in my life to be surrounded by strong women. For my mom, my sister, or my sisters, I don't know. And so that's always been a staple of my life is women who are strong, who have purpose, who know where they're going in life. And it's funny, as I look back at this now, I look at this character in that same vein, in that, there's kind of that, they kind of play it up like, oh, the men just want to goof around and whatever, and the women are the one who are in charge. But for me, growing up, that, the fact that she took charge and that she essentially was the leader of this community in many ways, that was not out of the norm for me, because that is how I was raised, was that, men and women take equal parts. Now, obviously in this one, the men were kind of bumbling drunks, but for me to have a woman in a role of authority like this was not out of the norm for me. And I always appreciate that, because that's one of those things about Star Trek that I enjoy the most, is that, it teaches us that, everybody has something to contribute. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from. We all have something to contribute. And that's something that's helped shaped, my approach to life and how I interact with people, is that, everybody and every one of us, we're on equal footing, and I don't know if that makes any sense, or if I'm just rambling, but the other thing I thought was particularly interesting about this episode is that Melinda Snodgrass's initial concept for this episode was that it was going to be about immigration, because she was not a fan of the US's immigration policy. And this is one thing that always surprises me about, well, not as surprises me, but I always think is really neat about Star Trek is how timely those stories and those principles and the things that it talks about are, especially with, not to get political, but what, things that are going on in the world right now. And how interesting it is that your perspective and how these episodes have the ability to affect us in different ways and take on different meanings, but also at the same time mean some of the same things that they did back then, based upon where we're at in our lives.
That is great stuff. Thank you very much, the Matt Boardman. All right, Jake's take. Cirroc, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit on the left field here, and that's I'm going to talk about a little bit with mythology and symbolism. So when they were in the medical ward, there was a moment there in the background that you could see this particular symbol, which I drew here on my paper here. Do you see that symbol right there? Now, you see that a lot everywhere you go. And the United States Army adapted that symbol for their medical corps in 1902. And that symbol is called the caduceus, and maybe you can pronounce it better than I can. But it refers to the symbol of Hermes or Mercury or Thoth. Multiple names for, I guess, the same entity or being, but that's where the origin of the symbol comes from. And it's a staff that's wrapped by two snakes, and it has the wings on it. There's a similar symbol that is a staff that's wrapped by one snake, which has more relevancy to the medical community. That's called the Asclepius, the rod of Asclepius. And I think it's interesting to me that it is something that is being used in Starfleet, that this medical symbolism still exists. Those many hundreds of years later, it still represents the medical profession in imagery and symbolism. So I thought that was something that just stood out to me when I saw it. It's actually something, you see the one snake one in Europe when you're traveling at pharmacies. That's pretty much the symbol for, a pharmacy is here somewhere. Right. So yes, you see this symbol. It's just something that we always see. I just thought I would highlight that particular thing because it is something that has lasted throughout the ages of time. it's thousands of years old, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not something new. And then the other aspect that I wanted to talk about was, and it's kind of relative to mythology, and that is the reference in this particular episode to the World War III and the movements that happened after that with the neo-transcendentalists and what transpires. And essentially the entire Federation storyline hinges upon the aftermath of this World War III storyline, I believe, that they've talked about in several shows. And I guess there's the part of me that, you know, when you parallel it today's what's happening in today in the world today, as far as, you know, the uprising and the conflict that we see in the world, I see a lot of that originating in text that almost predicts that outcome. And so it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And my question is, if this too is something that we are constantly like hearing and being exposed to in the subtlety of the backdrop of what we watch and we love, but they keep referring to this tragedy of this tragic event, are we heading in towards a self-fulfilling prophecy in this much of the same way that we see conflicts in the rest of the world kind of reaching out to those same kinds of fulfillment? And that's where I am concerned with, are there steps that can be taken to avoid fulfilling these prophecies? Is there things that we can do to not see these kinds of results, even though we do like the idea of the Federation and the ideals that it stands for and this place that we get to after? It seems like there's a major mass kind of destruction that has to happen before. And so that's where my concern lies, because it's not something that just affects us in this world realm of fantasy and fiction, but it also something that comes very much true in our real life experiences of what we see happening around the world. And, you know, I just wonder what steps can be taken so that we can get the good positive outcomes that we desire without also suffering through the trials and tribulations that lead to those outcomes. I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Everybody in the comments below, let us know, do you believe in the possibility of self-fulfilling prophecies? Seems like those happen quite a bit. If so, let us know in the comments below your thoughts on that. And with that, we'd like to say thank you very much to Melissa Longo, Stephanie Baker, Gregory K. out in Hawaii, Carrie Schwent, Allyson Leach-Heid, Dr. Susan B. Gruner, Jason the Outrageous Okun, My live in Tokyo, Christopher Patrick McGee. You got to shorten it for me. I'm dying over here. AKA McGillicuddy. We've got Matt Boardman, the Matt Boardman. Thank you all very much. For Cirroc Lofton, myself, Melissa Longo, Aaron Eisenberg. We'll see you next time. And until then, always remember the seventh rule.